The humid Manila air hung heavy over the modest training gym in General Santos City, as Manny Pacquiao wrapped his hands with the same methodical precision he had perfected over 3 decades. The familiar ritual brought him peace amid the storm of criticism that had followed his announcement. Outside, the relentless chatter of social media and sports commentators painted his return as desperate, forced, a shadow of greatness clinging to faded glory. The 46-year-old champion moved through his morning routine with deliberate focus, each movement a silent response to those who questioned his motives. The gym, filled with the scent of leather and sweat, had witnessed countless comebacks, but none carried the weight of this moment. Young fighters paused their training to watch the legend work, their eyes reflecting both admiration and concern for a man who had already given everything to the sport. Jinky had been unusually quiet during breakfast, her worried glances speaking volumes about the family discussions that had preceded this decision. Their children, Jimuel, Michael, Princess, Queen Elizabeth, and Israel, had grown accustomed to their father's battles, but this felt different. The political defeat still stung, and the boxing world had moved on without him during his 4-year absence. The criticism had been relentless and personal. Former champions questioned his hunger, promoters whispered about financial desperation, and younger fighters dismissed him as yesterday's news. Social media buzzed with speculation about his true motivations, painting narratives of a fallen politician seeking relevance through past glory. The phrase "forced comeback" had become attached to his name like an unwelcome shadow, but they didn't understand the fire that still burned within him. This wasn't about money or politics, or proving anything to critics who had never stepped between the ropes. This was about unfinished business, about a conversation that had been interrupted by time and circumstance. The name Floyd Mayweather Jr. carried weight that transcended sport, representing not just a potential payday, but a chance at redemption that had haunted him for nearly a decade. The 2015 fight had been the richest in boxing history, but it had left Pacquiao with questions that only another encounter could answer. The shoulder injury he had fought through, the conservative strategy that had frustrated fans, the decision that had divided the boxing world, all of it pointed toward an inevitable second chapter that circumstances had prevented from being written. Training sessions had become meditation, each combination thrown with the precision of a man who understood that time was his greatest opponent. His body, weathered by countless battles, still responded with the muscle memory of greatness. The speed remained, though tempered by wisdom. The power endured, refined by experience. Most importantly, the heart that had carried him from the streets of Kibawe to global stardom continued to beat with the rhythm of a warrior. The gym's old television flickered with news coverage of his announcement, reporters analyzing every word for hidden meanings. They spoke of legacy and money, of desperation and delusion, but they missed the essential truth that drove him forward. This wasn't about external validation or silencing critics. This was about completing a story that had been left unfinished, about answering questions that only he could ask and only the ring could answer. As evening approached and the gym emptied, Pacquiao remained, his shadow dancing against the walls under the harsh fluorescent lights. The silence he had maintained in the face of criticism wasn't weakness or uncertainty. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had faced every possible doubt and emerged with clarity of purpose. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more criticism, more speculation about his motives and chances. But tonight, in the sanctuary of preparation, Manny Pacquiao understood something his critics could never grasp. This wasn't a forced comeback driven by external pressures. This was a chosen path, walked by a man who had never learned to surrender toward a destination that only he could see clearly. The real fight was coming, and silence would soon give way to action. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pacquiao family compound as news vans lined the street outside their gates. Reporters clutched microphones and cameras, hungry for any glimpse of the man who had shattered the boxing world's expectations with his announcement. The silence Manny had maintained for weeks was about to break, and the anticipation crackled through the humid air like electricity before a storm. Inside the house, Jinky moved through her morning routine with practiced grace, though her movements carried the tension of a woman watching her husband prepare for another war. The children had grown accustomed to media attention, but this felt different. The criticism had been particularly harsh this time, with former champions and analysts questioning not just Manny's abilities, but his very sanity for considering a return at 46. Social media had become a battlefield where opinions clashed with the fury of opposing armies. Hashtags like forced comeback and desperate return trended globally, while supporters countered with never count out Pac-Man and legendary return. The divide was stark, passionate and unforgiving. Boxing forums exploded with debates that stretched deep into the night, fans arguing with the fervor of religious converts defending their faith. The most painful criticism came from those he had once considered allies. Former training partners questioned his motivations in carefully worded interviews, their diplomatic language barely concealing their skepticism. Promoters who had once courted his attention now spoke in hushed tones about the dangers of comebacks, citing cautionary tales of legends who had stayed too long at the party. Financial analysts dissected his political campaign expenses, painting narratives of a man driven by economic necessity rather than competitive fire. The numbers were scrutinized, debated, and weaponized by those seeking to diminish his legacy. They spoke of houses, investments, and campaign debts as if they understood the complex motivations that drove a champion's heart. But the cruelest cuts came from younger fighters who dismissed him as irrelevant, a relic from a bygone era desperately clinging to faded glory. Their words carried the arrogance of youth, the certainty of those who had never faced the twilight of their own careers. They spoke of speed lost and reflexes dulled, of a man chasing ghosts in an empty arena. The international press had been equally divided. American outlets focused on the spectacle and potential pay-per-view numbers, while Filipino media treated the announcement with the reverence reserved for national heroes. European journalists approached the story with analytical detachment, weighing the sporting merits against the obvious risks. Medical experts emerged from academic shadows to offer unsolicited opinions about the dangers of competing at such an advanced age. They cited studies and statistics, painting grim pictures of neurological damage and physical decline. Their concerns, though well-intentioned, felt like funeral dirges to those who still believed in the magic of championship boxing. Yet beneath the cacophony of criticism and concern, a different current flowed. Gym owners in the Philippines reported increased membership as young fighters sought to emulate their heroes' dedication. Boxing coaches found themselves answering questions about technique and training from students inspired by the possibility of witnessing greatness one more time. The name Mayweather carried its own gravitational pull, drawing attention from casual fans who remembered their first encounter. The unfinished business between them had become boxing folklore, a story that demanded completion regardless of the critics' concerns. As afternoon approached and the media circus outside grew larger, Manny understood that breaking his silence would only intensify the storm. But some truths could no longer remain unspoken, and some challenges could no longer be ignored. The time for silence was ending. The grand ballroom of the Manila Hotel buzzed with anticipation as journalists from around the world adjusted their cameras and tested their microphones. The ornate chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled crowd, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a state dinner than a press conference. Manny Pacquiao had chosen this venue deliberately, understanding that his words would carry more weight in a setting that commanded respect. Security personnel moved with quiet efficiency, ensuring that every angle was covered while maintaining the dignity befitting a national hero. The Filipino press occupied the front rows, their faces reflecting the gravity of the moment. International correspondents filled the remaining seats, their notebooks ready to capture what many suspected would be one of the most significant announcements in recent boxing history. The 46-year-old champion entered the room with the measured stride of a man who had faced far more intimidating audiences than a room full of reporters. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, projecting the image of a statesman rather than a fighter. Yet his eyes carried the unmistakable fire that had defined his career. The murmur of conversation died instantly as he approached the podium. Behind him, a simple backdrop displayed the logos of his promotional company and training facility, deliberately understated compared to the flashy productions that had become standard in modern boxing. This was not about spectacle or manufactured drama. This was about truth, delivered with the directness that had always characterized his approach to both sport and life. The cameras clicked in rapid succession as he arranged his notes, each photographer hoping to capture the definitive image of this historic moment. Television crews adjusted their angles, knowing that these images would be broadcast around the world within minutes. The weight of global attention settled over the room like a heavy blanket. For weeks, speculation had run rampant about his intentions. The cryptic social media posts, the increased training activity, the meetings with promoters and television executives had all pointed towards something significant. But the boxing world had learned to temper its expectations when it came to comeback announcements, having been disappointed too many times by exhibitions and carefully orchestrated publicity stunts. The criticism had reached a crescendo in the days leading up to this moment. Former champions had questioned his judgment in increasingly harsh terms. Medical experts had issued warnings about the dangers of competing at his age. Financial analysts had painted unflattering pictures of his motivations. The phrase "forced comeback" had become so associated with his name that it appeared in nearly every preview article. Yet here he stood, radiating the quiet confidence that had carried him through 8 weight divisions and countless battles. The man who had risen from poverty to become the most successful boxer in Philippine history was about to address his critics directly, without the filter of intermediaries or the protection of carefully crafted statements. The room fell completely silent as he leaned toward the microphone cluster. Every person present understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment, not just in boxing history, but in the ongoing story of one of sport's most compelling figures. The anticipation was almost unbearable, the silence pregnant with possibility. Outside, Manila continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in this elegant ballroom, words were about to be spoken that would reverberate through the boxing world for months to come. The man who had spent weeks absorbing criticism and speculation was finally ready to speak his truth. The silence stretched for another heartbeat, and then Manny Pacquiao began to reshape the narrative that others had written about him. The words that emerged from Manny Pacquiao's lips cut through the Manila hotel ballroom like precision strikes, each sentence delivered with the calculated force of a champion who had spent decades mastering the art of timing. His voice carried no trace of defensiveness or anger, only the steady conviction of a man who had found clarity amid the chaos of public opinion. He addressed the forced comeback narrative head-on, dismantling it with the methodical precision he had once used to dismantle opponents in the ring. The financial speculation, the political disappointment theories, the age-related concerns, each criticism was acknowledged and then systematically refuted, with facts that painted a very different picture of his motivations. The assembled journalists leaned forward as he detailed his current financial position, revealing investments and business ventures that contradicted the desperate comeback narrative. His political defeat, rather than being a source of shame or financial pressure, had actually freed him from obligations that had kept him away from his true calling. The numbers he presented painted the portrait of a man choosing to fight, not being forced into it. But it was when he mentioned Floyd Mayweather Jr. that the room's energy shifted palpably. The name alone carried enough weight to change the trajectory of any conversation, but the way Pacquiao spoke it, with respect but also unmistakable determination, suggested this was more than mere wishful thinking. The unfinished business between them had haunted the boxing world for nearly a decade. He detailed the ongoing negotiations with a specificity that surprised even the most seasoned reporters. Dates were mentioned, venues discussed, and most importantly, the distinction between a real fight and an exhibition was emphasized repeatedly. This would not be another carefully choreographed spectacle designed to entertain rather than compete. This would be two legends settling their differences with the same intensity that had defined their primes. The revelation about his shoulder injury during their 2015 encounter was delivered without self-pity or excuse-making. Instead, he presented it as context for why their first meeting had left so many questions unanswered. The conservative strategy, the frustrated fans, the controversial decision, All of it pointed toward the need for a definitive conclusion that only a second fight could provide. Television executives and streaming platforms had already expressed serious interest, he revealed, with negotiations reaching advanced stages. The global appetite for this rematch had never truly diminished, merely been suppressed by the assumption that it would never happen. Now, with both fighters approaching 50, the window was closing rapidly, making this potentially the last opportunity for closure. The medical concerns that had dominated recent coverage were addressed with documentation from his recent examinations. Brain scans, cardiovascular tests, and comprehensive physical evaluations all painted the picture of a man whose body, while showing the wear of 3 decades in professional boxing, remained capable of elite competition. His training footage from recent months supported these clinical findings. As he spoke about his preparation and mindset, the transformation from politician back to fighter became evident. The diplomatic language of his senatorial campaign had been replaced by the direct, purposeful communication of a man who understood exactly what he wanted to accomplish. This was not about legacy protection or financial gain. This was about completing unfinished business. The room remained completely silent as he outlined his timeline and expectations. April 2026 in Las Vegas had been tentatively agreed upon, pending final contract negotiations. The venue would be appropriate for what many were already calling the true fight of the century, a designation their first encounter had failed to earn. When he finally stepped back from the microphone cluster, the silence stretched for several seconds before the explosion of questions began. The explosion of camera flashes that followed Manny Pacquiao's announcement created a strobe light effect throughout the Manila hotel ballroom, each burst capturing the stunned expressions of journalists who had expected denials rather than confirmations. Within minutes, news alerts were pinging on phones across the globe as the story spread with the velocity of wildfire, through social media platforms and news networks. The immediate aftermath was electric chaos. Reporters shouted questions in multiple languages while their colleagues frantically typed updates on laptops and smartphones. The carefully orchestrated press conference had transformed into something resembling a feeding frenzy, with everyone desperate to be the first to break additional details or secure exclusive follow-up interviews. In Las Vegas, the news reached Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s camp within minutes of Pacquiao's announcement. The 48-year-old former champion, who had been maintaining his usual training regimen despite official retirement, suddenly found himself at the center of renewed speculation. His social media accounts, typically filled with displays of wealth and lifestyle content, remained conspicuously silent as the boxing world waited for his response. The financial implications became immediately apparent as betting odds appeared on offshore gambling sites within hours. Early lines favored Mayweather slightly, but the margin was closer than many expected, reflecting both fighters' advanced ages and the unpredictable nature of their potential encounter. Cryptocurrency betting platforms reported unprecedented early action on a fight that existed only in negotiation. Television executives and streaming service representatives began making urgent phone calls as the magnitude of the opportunity became clear. The first Pacquiao-Mayweather fight had generated over 4 million pay-per-view buys and hundreds of millions in revenue. A rematch, positioned as the final chapter in both fighters' careers, promised to shatter those records despite their advanced ages. In the Philippines, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Traffic in Manila slowed as drivers pulled over to watch news coverage on their phones. Social media exploded with messages of support and national pride, with hashtags related to Pacquiao trending globally within the hour. The economic impact of his announcement was already being calculated by government officials who understood the tourism and media revenue potential. Boxing gyms across America reported immediate spikes in membership inquiries as casual fans remembered their love for the sport. The announcement had reminded the world why boxing, despite years of declining mainstream interest, could still capture global attention like no other sport when the stakes were high enough. Former champions and current fighters began weighing in with their opinions, creating a secondary news cycle of reactions and predictions. Some praised Pacquiao's courage, while others questioned the wisdom of both fighters, risking their legacies at such advanced ages. The divide was sharp and passionate, reflecting the polarizing nature of comeback fights involving legendary figures. Medical experts found themselves thrust into the spotlight as news programs sought commentary on the health implications of two fighters approaching 50 competing at the highest level. Brain injury specialists and sports medicine doctors provided sobering assessments while acknowledging that both fighters had access to the best medical care and monitoring available. The international boxing sanctioning bodies began positioning themselves for involvement, understanding that a Pacquiao-Mayweather rematch would require their cooperation and oversight. Title implications were discussed despite both fighters being well past their championship primes, as organizations sought to attach their brands to what promised to be a historic event. As evening fell in Manila and morning broke in Las Vegas, the boxing world found itself fundamentally changed by a single press conference. The announcement had transformed speculation into reality, forcing everyone from promoters to fans to confront the possibility that they might witness one final chapter in one of sport's greatest rivalries. The silence had been broken, and there would be no going back. The morning in General Santos City began with sunlight filtering through the blinds of Manny Pacquiao's bedroom, casting golden stripes across the polished wooden floor. The air carried the familiar mixture of sea salt and the distant aroma of tropical flowers, a constant reminder of his homeland. Despite the exterior tranquility, inside the house, the atmosphere pulsed with renewed energy. Following his announcement of his intention to face Floyd Mayweather in a rematch, Pacquiao's routine underwent a significant transformation. The house, once a refuge of rest and family gatherings, now vibrated with the intensity of a training camp. Assistants and trainers moved with purpose, adjusting schedules, coordinating sessions, and ensuring every detail was meticulously planned. At the center of this organized storm stood Pacquiao, whose unwavering discipline served as an example to everyone around him. At 46 years old, he understood the demands that a fight of this magnitude would require. Each training session was approached with a seriousness that reflected not only his determination, but also his respect for the sport that had shaped him. Mornings began before dawn with runs along the coastline, where the sound of breaking waves provided a natural rhythm for his steps. These runs were not merely physical exercises, but also moments of reflection where he visualized each round, each movement, each strategy he could employ against Mayweather. Afternoons were dedicated to technical training in the gymnasium, where the sound of punches against heavy bags echoed like war drums. Trainers watched attentively, correcting postures, adjusting angles, and refining techniques. The speed and agility that had defined his fighting style were being meticulously honed, ensuring that despite his age, he remained a formidable force in the ring. Nutrition became an exact science, with meals planned to provide necessary energy without adding unnecessary weight. Every calorie was accounted for, each nutrient carefully balanced to optimize performance. Hydration was closely monitored, ensuring his body remained in ideal condition to withstand the rigors of intense training. Rest, often underestimated, became a priority. Physiotherapy sessions were scheduled regularly to prevent injuries and promote muscle recovery. Meditation and mindfulness techniques were incorporated to keep the mind sharp and focused, recognizing that the mental battle was as crucial as the physical one. Meanwhile, the media continued to speculate about the impending rematch. Analysts dissected every aspect of Pacquiao's training, comparing it to Mayweather's, attempting to predict the outcome of a confrontation between two boxing titans. The external pressure was immense, but within his home, Pacquiao maintained unwavering focus, isolating himself from distractions and concentrating on the monumental task ahead. The local community, aware of the importance of this moment, offered their support in subtle ways. Messages of encouragement were left at his doorstep, and young aspiring boxers gathered outside the gymnasium, hoping to glimpse their idol and perhaps absorb some of his determination. As days transformed into weeks, Pacquiao's transformation from retired politician to warrior seeking redemption became evident. Each drop of sweat shed in training was a step toward preparing to face Mayweather once more. The journey was not just about winning a fight, it was about reaffirming his identity, his passion, and his legacy in the boxing world. The community's faith in him was palpable, their collective hopes and dreams riding on his shoulders. Children wore his jerseys to school, elderly fans gathered in coffee shops to discuss his chances, and the entire nation seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what many believed would be his final opportunity for vindication. The warrior's awakening was complete. The world watched, awaiting the moment when Manny Pacquiao would enter the ring, not just to fight, but to prove once again why he was a living legend of the sport. The boxing world held its collective breath for 72 hours after Manny Pacquiao's bombshell announcement, waiting for the inevitable response from Floyd Mayweather Jr. When it finally came, it arrived not through a traditional press conference or media statement, but via a carefully orchestrated social media campaign that demonstrated the promotional genius that had made him the highest-paid athlete in boxing history. The first hint emerged on Instagram, where Mayweather posted a video of himself hitting the heavy bag with the caption that simply read, "Still undefeated." The clip, filmed in his private Las Vegas gym, showed a fighter whose reflexes and hand speed remained remarkably sharp despite his 48 years. Within minutes, the post had garnered hundreds of thousands of views and tens of thousands of comments from fans demanding clarification about his intentions regarding Pacquiao's challenge. The strategic silence that followed was vintage Mayweather, a masterclass in building anticipation while maintaining control of the narrative. His team understood that every hour of delay increased global interest, and more importantly, the potential financial value of any eventual agreement. Boxing insiders recognized the calculated nature of his response, knowing that Mayweather never made impulsive decisions when millions of dollars were at stake. Behind the scenes, however, the machinery of negotiation had already begun moving. Mayweather's longtime advisor, Al Heyman, had been in contact with Pacquiao's representatives within hours of the Manila announcement. The preliminary discussions focused not on whether the fight would happen, but on the complex financial and logistical arrangements that would make it possible. Both camps understood that this rematch represented potentially the final massive payday for either fighter. The venue negotiations proved particularly intricate, with Las Vegas casinos competing aggressively for the right to host what many were already calling the true fight of the century. The MGM Grand, site of their first encounter, held sentimental value, but newer venues offered superior facilities and larger capacities. The economic impact on whichever city ultimately hosted the event was projected to exceed $100 million in tourism and related revenue. Television and streaming rights became another battlefield, with traditional broadcasters facing unprecedented competition from digital platforms. Netflix, Amazon Prime, and other streaming giants had entered the sports content arena with massive budgets and global reach that traditional pay-per-view models couldn't match. The potential for international distribution through streaming platforms promised to expand the fight's audience far beyond traditional boxing demographics. Mayweather's training regimen, while less publicized than Pacquiao's, was equally intense. His private gymnasium in Las Vegas became a fortress of preparation, with access strictly limited to essential personnel. Unlike his opponent, who trained in the public eye of his hometown, Mayweather preferred the controlled environment of complete privacy, where every aspect of his preparation could be monitored and optimized without external scrutiny. The psychological warfare between the camps began subtly, with carefully leaked information about training progress and physical condition. Mayweather's team emphasized his perfect professional record and the fact that he had never truly been hurt in a professional fight. Pacquiao's supporters countered by highlighting his recent performance against Mario Barrios and his legendary ability to rise to the occasion in significant fights. Medical clearances became a crucial component of the negotiations, with both fighters required to undergo comprehensive examinations by independent physicians. The Nevada State Athletic Commission, likely to oversee the bout, had implemented stricter protocols for older fighters following several high-profile incidents in recent years. Brain scans, cardiovascular stress tests, and neurological evaluations would all be mandatory before either fighter could be licensed. The financial structure of the fight required unprecedented complexity, with both fighters demanding equal treatment in terms of purse distribution and promotional control. Unlike their first encounter, where Mayweather held most of the leverage, the rematch negotiations reflected their equal status as aging legends seeking one final moment of glory. Revenue-sharing agreements covered everything from ticket sales to international broadcasting rights to merchandise sales. As negotiations progressed, the boxing world began to accept that this rematch would indeed happen. The preliminary agreements were taking shape, with April 2026 in Las Vegas emerging as the most likely scenario. Both fighters had too much to gain and too little time remaining in their careers to allow this opportunity to slip away. The response from Mayweather, when it finally came in full, would reshape the landscape of professional boxing and set in motion events that would culminate in one of the most anticipated sporting events in recent memory. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would settle questions that had lingered for nearly a decade. The MGM Grand Conference Center in Las Vegas had been transformed into a fortress of security and spectacle for what would become one of the most significant contract signings in boxing history. The venue, chosen for its symbolic connection to their first encounter, buzzed with an energy that transcended typical promotional events. Representatives from major networks, streaming platforms, and international media outlets filled every available seat, their cameras and equipment creating a technological maze that captured every angle of the historic moment. Manny Pacquiao arrived first, his entourage moving through the casino floor with the practiced efficiency of a presidential security detail. The 46-year-old champion wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected both dignity and determination, his demeanor calm despite the magnitude of the moment. Jinky walked beside him, her presence serving as a reminder that this decision had been made with full family support and understanding of the risks involved. The financial terms that had been negotiated over months of intense discussions represented a revolutionary approach to boxing promotion. Both fighters would receive guaranteed purses of $50 million, with additional revenue sharing from pay-per-view sales, international broadcasting rights and merchandise that could potentially double those amounts. The deal structure reflected their equal status as aging legends, neither holding leverage over the other in what both understood would likely be their final major payday. Floyd Mayweather's entrance 30 minutes later created a different kind of energy in the room. His trademark confidence remained intact despite his 48 years, his diamond-encrusted watch catching the camera lights as he moved toward the signing table. The undefeated champions team had negotiated every detail with the precision that had characterized his entire career, ensuring that his perfect record would be protected by the most favorable possible circumstances. The contract itself represented months of legal complexity, with clauses covering everything from drug testing protocols to revenue distribution formulas. Both fighters would be subject to random testing by the voluntary anti-doping agency, with any violations resulting in immediate fight cancellation and financial penalties. The medical requirements were equally stringent, with independent physicians required to clear both fighters within 30 days of the bout. April 26, 2026 had been selected as the fight date, giving both fighters 6 months to prepare for what many expected would be their final professional encounter. The timing allowed for optimal promotion, while ensuring adequate preparation time for athletes approaching 50 years of age. Las Vegas in late April offered ideal weather conditions and maximum tourism potential for the host city. The venue selection had ultimately favored the MGM Grand Garden Arena, despite its smaller capacity compared to newer facilities. The historical significance of the location, combined with its proven ability to handle events of this magnitude, made it the logical choice. Every seat would be sold within minutes of tickets going on sale, with secondary market prices expected to reach unprecedented levels. International broadcasting rights had been divided among multiple platforms to maximize global reach. Traditional pay-per-view would handle North American distribution, while streaming services would carry the fight to international markets where boxing had been gaining popularity. The potential global audience was estimated at over 1 billion viewers, making it one of the most watched sporting events in history. The promotional campaign would begin immediately, with both fighters committed to a series of press conferences, media appearances, and training exhibitions designed to build anticipation. The marketing budget exceeded $20 million, reflecting the enormous financial stakes involved. Every aspect of the promotion would be carefully choreographed to maximize interest while maintaining the dignity appropriate for two legendary champions. As the signing ceremony concluded, both fighters understood that they had committed themselves to a preparation regimen that would test every aspect of their physical and mental conditioning. The next 6 months would determine whether age and time had diminished their abilities or whether championship heart could overcome the inevitable effects of time. The boxing world had its answer to the question that had lingered for nearly a decade. Pacquiao versus Mayweather 2 was no longer speculation or wishful thinking. The contracts were signed, the date was set, and two legends had committed themselves to settling their unfinished business in the only arena that mattered. The silence had been broken, the critics had been answered, and the stage was set for what promised to be the defining moment of both fighters' legendary careers. The countdown to April 26, 2026 had officially begun, and the boxing world would never be the same. The real fight was coming, and this time there would be no questions left unanswered.